As the sun sets over the city, the neon signs begin to glow, marking another long day for our f***ing dumb protagonist named Jin Young. At 24 years old, he has become a master of the part-time hustle, spending his evenings scrubbing floors and brewing coffee at a local cafe until the very last light goes out. While his boss appreciates his tireless work ethic, Jin Young has a hidden reason for staying late, as he finds the silence of the empty shop far more welcoming than the atmosphere waiting for him at home. When he finally arrives at the large, modern mansion where he lives, he moves through the front door like a professional intruder, hoping to reach his room without being noticed. His luck fails him immediately when he finds the lady of the house, Mrs. Yu, waiting in the living room. She greets him with her usual cold and distant expression, complaining that his late arrival kept her awake. Though she speaks with a sharp edge, she casually mentions that there is food on the table if he is hungry. Jin Young assumes she is just offloading leftovers, but as he lifts the lid, he realizes the meal is surprisingly fresh and still warm. He eats in a state of quiet confusion, eventually scrubbing the dishes to make sure he leaves no trace of his existence behind. Hoping the worst of the night is over, Jin Young begins the treacherous journey up the stairs, but the hallway proves to be a literal stumbling block. He accidentally bumps into the eldest daughter, Sophie, who treats the minor collision as if she has just survived a high-speed car wreck. She uses her intimidating presence to demand $50 for her supposed medical expenses, leaving Jin Young to wonder how a simple shoulder brush could be so expensive. He reluctantly hands over the cash, feeling like he has just been mugged in his own hallway, while Sophie walks away with a mysterious smirk. The commotion draws out the youngest daughter, Sarah, who bursts from her room with enough temper to light up the entire block. She yells at them both for being too loud and threatens to provide them with microphones if they want to keep performing in the hallway. Exhausted and defeated, Jin Young finally retreats to the safety of his bedroom, convinced that he is the most hated person in the entire building. He pulls out his bank account book and stares at the depressing balance, realizing that at this rate, it will take forever to save up enough money to move out. He reflects on how his life changed 9 years ago when his parents passed away and the late Mr. Yu, a kind CEO who felt indebted to his father, took him in. Since the old man passed away from a lifetime of smoking, Jin Young has felt entirely alone, viewing his presence in the house as a burden to the three women. However, the reality behind the closed doors of the mansion is much different than what Jin Young perceives. In her room, Sophie carefully places the $50 into a secret box filled with photos of Jin Young, her face flushing with a mix of guilt and hidden affection. Nearby, Sarah sits alone on her bed, clutching her pillow in frustration because she once again lost her temper when she actually wanted to greet him kindly. Even Mrs. Yu stands in the kitchen, quietly smiling to herself because she managed to have a conversation with him and feels touched that he did the dishes without being asked. While Jin Young drifts off to sleep dreaming of an escape, he is completely unaware that he is living in a house full of people who actually adore him but are absolutely terrible at showing it. The sun shines brightly through the large windows as birds chirp outside, marking the start of a quiet Sunday morning. Sophie wakes up slowly and stretches in her bed, but her peace is immediately ruined by a persistent phone notification. It is a message from her boss asking about a work file on her day off, and she grumbles about the unfairness of being bothered on a weekend. She realizes that life would be much easier if she worked for her mother's company instead, where she could enjoy the perks of being the boss's daughter. Her stomach joins the protest with a loud growl, and she decides that finding a meal is more important than worrying about work emails. She wanders out of her room and calls for her mother, only to find the living room completely deserted. It seems even company presidents have to work on Sundays, leaving Sophie to fend for herself. A quick peek into Sarah's messy bedroom confirms that her sister is also gone, which leaves Sophie feeling strangely abandoned in the massive house. As she heads back toward the hallway, she notices that Jin Young has uncharacteristically left his bedroom door wide open. This is a rare opportunity since he usually keeps it locked, and her curiosity leads her straight inside. Sophie plops down on his bed and immediately spots his bank account book lying right there in the open. She cannot resist taking a look and is shocked to discover that he has managed to save up a small fortune. It seems impossible that a part-timer has more money in the bank than she does with her full-time career. She reflects on how he refuses any financial help and even pays his own share of the household expenses, which makes his massive savings even more mysterious. For a brief moment, she wonders if he is secretly saving up to buy her a spectacular surprise gift. She quickly dismisses the idea when she remembers that she usually treats him like her personal servant, making a sussy gesture seem like a total fantasy. Just then, Jin Young walks into the room and stops in his tracks, looking completely drained. He was sent home early from the cafe after a series of clumsy blunders, and the last thing he expected was to find a home intruder sitting on his bed. He tries to ask what she is doing there, but Sophie is already on the offensive, reminding him that he was the one who left the door open. She dangles the bank book in front of his face and demands to know what all this hidden money is actually for. Jin Young realizes there is no point in making up a story and sighs, admitting that he is saving every cent so he can finally move out. Sophie is genuinely stung by the news and tries to hide it behind an angry lecture. She claims she was touched because she thought the money was for a thank you gift for the family, and she accuses him of being a secretive and ungrateful houseguest. Jin Young has had enough of being treated like a burden and demands that she return his property at once. When she refuses and claims she cannot trust him anymore, his patience finally snaps. In a sudden surge of frustration, he grabs her and pins her, telling her in a low voice that he is done with her games. The sudden intensity catches them both off guard, and the room falls into a heavy silence. Realizing he has let his temper get the best of him, Jin Young quickly lets go and storms out, slamming the door behind him. He immediately regrets losing his cool, fearing that he has only made his situation in the house much worse. Meanwhile, Sophie stays perfectly still on the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she looks at the marks on her wrist. She realizes with a flush of heat that Jin Young is not a little kid anymore, and that his hands are much stronger and rougher than she ever realized. She thinks back to high school when he would walk her home to keep her safe, and she finds herself overwhelmed by a confusing mix of anger and sudden racing attraction. Standing outside Sophie's door, Jin Young's the weight of his earlier outburst and decides he needs to offer a sincere apology. He knocks gently, but when silence greets him from the other side, he assumes she must be too angry to even speak to him. He groans inwardly, figuring he should just give her some space to cool down before he makes things any worse. As he turns to trudge back to his own room, Sophie suddenly finds her voice and frantically shouts for him to stop right where he is. Jin Young pauses in confusion, wondering if he is about to get another lecture, but Sophie takes a deep breath and says she is finally ready to listen to whatever he has to say. Jin Young leans against the doorframe and begins to pour his heart out, racking his brain for every kind thing she has ever done for him. He mentions how grateful he felt back in high school when she insisted on walking him home, and how he never forgot the times she treated him to a warm meal or shared her umbrella on a rainy day. Inside the room, Sophie is a blushing mess, her heart racing as she realizes that he actually remembered all those small gestures from years ago. She sits on her bed, completely overwhelmed by the sound of his voice, and finding herself wanting the moment to last forever. Jin Young continues his list of gratitude, recalling how she stayed by his side and nursed him through a terrible bout of the flu when he had no one else to turn to. The emotional intensity of the conversation becomes too much for Sophie, and she lets out a series of shaky, heavy breaths that Jin Young can hear through the thin wood of the door. He instantly panics, worrying that his earlier rough handling might have actually caused her some sussy pain. He tries to force the door open to check on her, but Sophie slams her weight against it, desperately claiming she is just having a minor mishap. Relieved that she isn't actually injured, Jin Young offers a quiet farewell and decides to leave her to rest, feeling a sense of relief that the tension between them seems to have finally snapped. Sophie slumps against the door as she hears his footsteps fade away, her mind spinning with a sudden and intense realization. She looks at the marks on her wrist and accepts that she can no longer view him as just a little kid, especially after the way her body reacted to his sudden display of strength. To clear her head and cool her burning face, she decides to head downstairs for a glass of water, only to be interrupted by the sound of the front door clicking open. Her mother and Sarah have returned from their shopping trip at the mall, carrying bags of takeout for a family dinner. The sight of Jin Young's shoes at the entrance sends a fresh jolt of anxiety through Sophie, as she is nowhere near ready to look him in the eye after her secret reaction. When Mrs. Yu asks if the young man is home, Sophie stammers out a lie, suggesting he might be resting in his room because he isn't feeling well. She feels a deep sense of guilt for hiding her true feelings and decides that a long, hot shower is the only way to wash away her confusion. Under the steaming water, she reflects on how crazy she must be to have such thoughts about someone she grew up with, even going as far as drawing a little portrait of him in the mist on the glass. Once she is finished, Sophie heads back down the hallway, hoping that a bit of time has returned her world to normal. However, she notices that Jin Young's door is once again slightly ajar, and her curiosity gets the better of her as she stops to peek inside. Her heart stops when she sees her mother, Mrs. Yu, sitting on the edge of Jin Young's bed while he is fast asleep. Sophie watches in absolute paralyzed shock as her cold and distant mother leans down and does something very sussy. In that single silent moment, Sophie realizes that she isn't the only one in the house who has been hiding a very big secret. Inside the quiet bedroom, Mrs. Yu sits on the edge of the bed and gently strokes the sleeping young man's forehead, feeling relieved that he is not actually running a fever. She looks down at him with a soft and pensive expression, thinking about how hard he works to support himself even while he is still a student. As Jin Young shifts slightly in his sleep, she finds herself leaning, her heart racing, as she gazes at his peaceful face. In a silent moment, she leans down and does something sussy with him, but she immediately pulls back with a look of deep regret. She sits at his desk for a moment, shaking her head and realizing that she can no longer look at him as just the child she was asked to raise. She feels a profound sense of guilt for harboring such feelings for someone who grew up under her roof, and quietly slips out of the room to hide her blushing face. Watching from the shadows of the hallway, Sophie is frozen in a state of absolute disbelief at what she has just witnessed. She tries to rationalize the scene in her head, telling herself that it was probably just a quick peck on the cheek or some form of hidden motherly affection. She knows her mother is famous for being cold and distant, having stopped showing any warmth to her own daughters years ago, so the idea of her being this tender with Jin Young seems impossible. She stands in the bathroom, twirling her hair and wondering if her mother could truly be in love with the young man after nearly a decade of living together. The more she thinks about it, the more her head spins, and she decides that she simply cannot deal with this much drama before her morning coffee. The next morning, the house finally falls silent, and Sarah creeps out of her room with a mischievous glint in her eye, thrilled to finally have the place all to herself. She has been waiting for everyone to leave for work, describing the wait as a form of slow torture that she is finally free from. She lets herself into Jin Young's room and begins rummaging through his things with a playful giggle before throwing herself onto his unmade bed. She spends the next several minutes rolling around on the mattress and burying her face in his pillow, breathing in his scent and looking like she is having the time of her life. She is so lost in her own secret celebration that she completely fails to notice the door opening behind her. Sophie stands in the doorway, staring at her younger sister's bizarre behavior with a look of pure exhaustion, realizing that her family has officially reached a level of chaos that she never thought possible. Sophie retreats to the quiet sanctuary of a bathroom stall to process the absolute lunacy currently unfolding under her roof. Between catching her mother playing a secret game of Sleeping Beauty with Jin Young and witnessing her sister's bizarre bedroom antics, she concludes that sanity has officially moved out of the house. She becomes genuinely concerned that if she doesn't intervene soon, her mother and sister might actually make a move on him. Her greatest fear is that Jin Young might realize how strange the women in his life truly are and decide to vanish into thin air to escape the chaos. She resolves to take matters into her own hands and find a way to fix the situation before things spiral further out of control. This tension had been brewing for quite a while, beginning a year ago when Mrs. Yu first took over the company. With profits sliding and her employees whispering that she wasn't up to the task, her stress levels were already at a breaking point. It was during this period of professional crisis that a young Jin Young had approached her to announce he found a part-time job to pay for his keep. Already pushed to the edge, she had completely snapped at him, shouting that she never asked for his money and reminding him with unnecessary cruelty that he wasn't even part of the family. She had felt a wave of immediate regret as the words left her mouth, realizing she had just pushed away the one person she truly cared about. Back in the present, Sophie decides that the only way to save Jin Young is to literally remove him from the house. She figures that separating him from her competitive mother and sister is the only way to restore some semblance of order to their lives. While Jin Young is in his room trying to focus on his studies, he feels a sudden and ominous chill, which usually signals the arrival of a Sophie-related disaster. Right on cue, she bursts his door and begins a high-intensity interrogation regarding the current state of his bank account. Jin Young tries to explain that his savings are exactly what she saw before, but Sophie isn't interested in a polite conversation. She produces a thick envelope of cash and insists he add it to his moving fund immediately. When he tries to decline the offer, she turns the encounter into a mandatory gift-giving session, ordering him to take the money before she gets genuinely angry. She leaves him standing there in a state of total bewilderment, making him wonder if she might be suffering from some sort of terminal illness, since people often act very strange when they think their time is almost up. The following day, Sophie continues her mission by hovering over Jin Young and showing him various apartment listings she found on her phone. Jin Young is touched by the effort, but quickly realizes that every single place she is excited about looks like a blatant internet scam or a total dump. When he tries to gently point out that these listings are almost certainly fake, she takes it as a personal insult and starts venting her frustration on him. Jin Young is left to ponder what has gotten into her lately, as her behavior seems to be getting more concerning by the hour. By evening, Sophie has retreated to a local restaurant to drown her sorrows in several bottles of green bottled courage. She is devastated that her plan to be helpful backfired so spectacularly, having drained her own bank account only to provide him with a list of non-existent apartments. In her drunken state, she briefly considers if she should just stop trying to be clever and use her natural charms to win him over instead. She quickly brings herself back to earth, acknowledging that he likely views her as a common bully and probably wants to spend as much time away from her as possible. Just as Jin Young is finishing another long shift at the cafe, he spots a very familiar and very wobbly figure leaning against a wall down the street. He realizes he cannot just ignore her when she is clearly struggling to walk in a straight line, and catches her just as she begins to lose her balance. He tries to ask why she decided to get so completely hammered on a weeknight, but she is far too gone for a logical explanation. She points toward a nearby place and insists they need to go inside to rest for a while, causing Jin Young to turn a very bright shade of red. As he stammers about the sussiness of the suggestion, a smirking Sophie reminds him that there is absolutely nothing to worry about since they are practically family. Jin Young finds himself standing at the entrance of a local place, wondering how his life led to this specific moment of exhaustion. He dutifully guides a very intoxicated Sophie into the room, feeling like a weary soldier carrying a ticking time bomb. As soon as they enter, Sophie essentially surrenders to gravity and collapses face first onto the bed. Jin Young breathes a sigh of relief, promising her that they will leave the very second she feels human again. To help the process along, he heads to the side table to fetch some water, hoping a little hydration will fix the situation. He carefully pulls her into a sitting position and offers the bottle, but Sophie's coordination has clearly stayed behind at the restaurant. She manages to pour more water down her front than into her mouth, turning her dress into a damp mess in a matter of seconds. Jin Young panics and rushes to find tissues, only to spin around and find Sophie casually starting to dry her wet clothes. He experiences a near catastrophic level of embarrassment and quickly turns his back, shielding his eyes like his life depends on it. He begins a stern lecture on the importance of propriety and personal boundaries, while Sophie simply ignores him and proceeds to make herself comfortable. While the steam fills the bathroom, Sophie's mind is far from simple hygiene. She hums happily to herself, feeling quite proud that her plan to lure him into a place actually worked without him running for the hills. She finds his flustered reaction incredibly charming and assumes his embarrassment is proof that he is secretly interested. She briefly considers the technicalities of the situation, realizing she has no idea what she is doing, but remains convinced that he will take the lead if she provides enough motivation. She even pauses to worry about the logistics of safety, wondering if there are any supplies nearby or if she should have planned ahead. Ultimately, she decides her heart is beating too fast to give up now and prepares for her big entrance. Outside in the main room, Jin Young is sitting at the table with his head in his hands, praying that things will not get any weirder than they already are. His prayers go unanswered as Sophie walks out of the bathroom wearing nothing but a loosely tied robe. He immediately returns to his favorite hobby of staring at the floor and covering his face, begging her to at least put the robe on properly. He even offers to go out and buy her a shirt just to give himself a reason to escape the room. Sophie, however, has no intention of letting him leave, and sneaks up behind him for a surprise hug. Jin-young freezes as he feels her arms wrap around him, his mind completely short-circuiting from the sudden sussy contact. He stammers about how it really isn't good for her to catch a cold, but Sophie simply tells him she doesn't need a shirt and that he should just stay put. Driven to the brink of a total breakdown, Jin-young decides it is time for another noble lecture. He tries to explain that he is only saying these things because he is worried about her safety. He warns her that other men might misinterpret her unguarded behavior and that she needs to be more careful in the future. He even attempts to hand her his jacket as a final act of chivalry, reminding her that beneath his composed exterior, he is still a man with his own feelings. Sophie remains silent for a long moment, her heart thumping loudly as she absorbs his words.